So, during a pastor's meeting, an old pastor stood up to testify to his faith. But his testimony surprised a number of people. And this is what he said. He looked at the group and said, "I am a lay pastor of a small, not growing church. I'm not ordained, I'm not seminary trained. I was actually asked to leave both Bible colleges I attended. I'm divorced and remarried, and on any given day I'm capable of being a jerk with my wife and family. I'm terminally insecure, which causes me to compensate with bouts of arrogance. And at times people irritate me, and I hide from them. I'm impulsive, which causes me to say things I shouldn't, and make promises I cannot keep. I am inconsistent. My walk with Christ is a stuttering, stumbling, bumbling attempt to follow him. At times his presence is so real, I can't stop the tears. And then without warning, I can't find him. Some days my faith is strong, impenetrable, and immovable. And some days my faith is weak, pathetic, helpless, knocked about like a paper cup floating on the ocean in the middle of a hurricane. I've been a Christian for 45 years, and I'm familiar with the vocabulary of faith, and I'm often asked to give advice about matters of faith. But I am still a mess. I'm light years away from being able to say with Paul, "Copy me." I'm 56 years old and still struggling, a flawed, clumsy, unstable follower of Jesus, a bona fide failure. Imagine putting that on your resume when applying to be a pastor. But if you listen to what he says, there's a realness about him. There's no pretensions, no masks, no boasting, nothing to hide behind. He says, "I'm a flawed, clumsy, unstable follower of Jesus." Makes me wonder how he learned that, how he got to that point. So was it that he was always that humble and always that way inclined? Or instead did he learn the hard way? He came to that point and then realised, this is actually who I am. Today we are looking at the final chapter of John, and it's been an excellent journey that we have been on as a fellowship. I'd love to do like one of those snapshots, what's come up to now, and to show a video of all the great points that people have brought out as we looked in this book. What we're finishing up with now is where John gives us a brilliant insight into the character of Jesus as he restores Peter, which is why the title of the final look at John is Forgiven, Restored, and Called. Early in Peter's life, he was nothing like that old pastor who had just given his testimony. Instead, Peter was outspoken, passionate disciple and one of Jesus' closest friends. He was enthusiastic, strong-willed, impulsive, and at times impetuous. For example, and I did say I was going to use this in my sermon. For example, it was Peter who left the boat to walk on the water to Jesus and promptly took his eyes off Jesus and began to sink. It was Peter who took Jesus aside to rebuke him for speaking the truth and was then swiftly corrected by Jesus. We also know that it was Peter who drew his sword and attacked the servant of the high priest and was immediately told to put that sword away. It was Peter who boasted that he would never forsake the Lord, even if everybody else did. Let me read from Matthew 26. Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. He was so sure, wasn't he? And yet, he was so wrong. Asked by a servant girl, he denies it. Asked by another person, he denies it. Asked by a third person, he calls down curses upon himself and denies it. He was so wrong. So let's set the scene of what's happening in this last chapter. Peter tells the others that he's going to go out fishing. And so a group of the disciples join him in their fishing expedition. They fish all night and catch nothing. And that would have been frustrating for them, but they've been there before and done that. Daylight the next day sees Jesus on the shore and tells them to throw the nets over the other side of the boat. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. They just caught an immense load of fish, 158 or something like that, more than what the nets should normally be able to handle. They couldn't pull it in on their own because they were asking for help. And then they see the fire on the shores of Galilee. And this picture is actually taken on the shores of Galilee. That's how it looks. So you can imagine the serenity, the feeling there that when they look, the sun's coming up, here's this fire. And there's Jesus there waiting for them. It's interesting that the Greek word for charcoal fire, which is anthrokia, is found in only 2 places in the New Testament. Only 2. The first was the description of the fire where Peter denied Jesus. And the second is now where Jesus meets him for breakfast. Nothing happens by coincidence. Nothing with Jesus. Last week, Doc shared how John, the Gospel, was different. It was unique, not like the other 3. Luke, when he wrote his Gospel, he's a doctor. And he's a historian. So he's concerned about getting the facts right. He loves angels, he loves anything to do with medical, and shares all about these things. You know Luke when he writes. And Matthew when he writes, he's writing to the Jewish people, wanting to make sure that they get the connection from the old to the new. And so putting in all the history of who was where and when, explaining the link between the two, that was Matthew's desire to do when he wrote. And Mark, I reckon Mark wrote for today's millennials. It's fast paced, it goes from bang, 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 there he is, now there he is. And the millennials get it. But John is different. John was written after many, many years, and he took time to think about what he saw and what he experienced. And so it's no coincidence that John's language in using these words to link the two together, and that's what makes it so important. Peter's going through a time of regret because of what happened around that fire. So Jesus is taking the initiative to restore Peter again around a fire fellowship. And that's what Jesus does, isn't it? His desire is to restore us, whatever way possible, back to a relationship with him. I like what DJ said this morning. God is a God of second chances. No matter where we are, no matter how bad we think things have become, God is there ready to restore us and forgive us. So they had breakfast together. All the disciples and Jesus there, all ate together. Then after the meal, Jesus then focuses his conversation on Peter. And I think he approached it so differently to how I would have approached it. I probably would have said, what were you thinking? I'm so disappointed in you. You said this. Why didn't you follow up with that? Where did you go and run and hide? That's probably how I would have approached things. And I probably wouldn't have said it quite so calmly. But Jesus doesn't do that, does he? Because he knows all that will do will increase the guilt that Peter feels. And he doesn't want to do that. So Jesus asked the question in a different way. So when they finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Do you love me? First thing to point out is he calls him Simon, son of John. And the only time he's ever called him that was right at the beginning of John, when he first called him to be a disciple. So it's like he's bringing him back to the beginning, saying, right, let's draw a line in the sand and start again. Simon, son of John, do you love him? It's also interesting to note that his ministry also started when he was called by a big catch of fish. It's things that come around, it's all set up. Sometimes we need to go back to the beginning of relationships. Sometimes we need to go back to where it all began, to rediscover that passion. I know as married couples, often when they're struggling, they return back to where maybe they spent their honeymoon, or where some particular event happened that they remind them of what it meant to be as a couple, and they start sharing from that point again. So here's Jesus. He's going to offer Peter another starting point, a second chance to make things right. So Jesus asks 3 times, do you love me? And each of Peter's responses are, yes, I do. And then after that response, Jesus gives him an assignment. So the first he said, feed my lambs. Just probably look after the young in the faith. Because don't forget what Peter's calling was initially, to be the rock of the church. The second question was, take care of my sheep, because my followers are to be your focus. And the third time, Jesus said, feed my sheep. Make sure you keep going for all as they mature. So Jesus is saying, I've got work for you to do. If you really love me, this is what you need to do. Some people see by Jesus asking 3 times, that's like wiping out the 3 times that Peter denied Jesus. And that works, but there's actually something, I believe, a lot deeper going on through this. When Jesus asked Simon, Peter, if he loved him, he used a specific word in the Greek to denote that type of love. So if you look in the Greek text, it says agape. So agape love is a sacrificial love of total commitment, a love with no strings attached, which is how God, as you know, loves us. So Jesus is basically saying to Peter, are you willing to give me your all to make the complete sacrifice necessary? And when Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you, he doesn't actually use the word agape. He uses the word phileo, which is fondness, to have affection, personal attachment, friendship, family, those sorts of things like that. It's a strong word, but doesn't mean the same as agape. So if I want to paraphrase it, it's something like this. Peter, do you love me 100% more than anything else? And Peter responds, Lord, you know I like you. See the difference? Peter was simply being honest here. He wasn't quite at that level of love yet. He was still suffering and hurting from what he had done and from his actions. So it's not bad that Peter responded that way. It's probably for the first time that Peter started being real with himself about who he was and that level of relationship that he has with God. So no more bravado, no more pride. This is a broken, hurting man who is being honest before God and the people around him. Because don't forget, this wasn't a private conversation. The other disciples were around that same fire. And as much as anything else, Jesus was restoring Peter in front of their eyes as well. They all knew what he did. They all knew what he said in the past. Peter was saying, even if all the other disciples fall away in your account, I never will. How wrong was he? So Jesus asked that question twice. Do you agape me? And Peter answers twice, Lord, I phileo you. Different types, different answers. On the third time that Jesus asks Peter, he changes it. In the Greek, it's very clear. Jesus asked Peter, Peter, do you phileo me? He brought down the level of love he was asking for Peter. And Peter responds, matching that, Lord, you know everything. You know that I phileo you. You know how I love you and what I can love you at this moment. See how gracious that was for Jesus? He could have insisted, no, you need to be like this. You want to be fully restored, you have to be at this level. And all Peter can do at that time, at that moment, is give Jesus this much. Because healing still had to happen. So instead of berating Peter and giving him a hard time, Jesus lowers the bar. And even though you can't give me your all, I'll take what you can give me now. Peter's not reinstated because of his excellence. He's not reinstated because of the level of love that he has for Jesus. Peter is reinstated because of grace.
Jesus said, you're alive, I can't believe you're alive. Okay, I was in the boat and I wasn't catching any fish, okay? But I heard this voice and the voice said, cast your net to the other side. And so I'm thinking, I'm a fisherman, I know what I'm doing, but I'm not catching any fish, you know? And so I throw that net over there and then a gaggle of fish pop into that net and I'm going, this is a total miracle. Who could have done that? I need to know who told me to throw the net to the other side. And boom, I look up and I mean, there's you. You're looking at me on the seashore going, it is I, the Lord, it's alive, I can't believe you're alive. This is awesome. Andrew, get out of the boat. Come on, Peter. Yeah. Do you love me? Yes, I love you. I love you. You're alive. This is so great.
Hey, feed my sheep.
Andrew, get out of the boat. Come on, man. It's here.
Peter.
Yeah.
Do you love me?
I love you. Yes. And I'm so sorry about that rooster clucking. I had no idea what that meant, but I do now. I'm better for it, all right? Okay.
Then feed my sheep.
Andrew, I'm smiling, but I'm serious. Come on, get out of the boat. It's him.
Peter.
Yeah.
Do you love me?
Jesus, mere words cannot describe the passion that I have for you. I love you. You know everything. I love you.
Good. Good. Then feed my sheep.
I didn't know you had livestock. Man, I still like you, though. There's something new about you all the time. That's what I love about you.
Peter,
Yeah.
do you remember the morning the ladies went to the tomb?
Yeah. We're all in a room trying to figure out what to do next, you know, because we thought you were dead. You know, you were dead, you know. We're trying to figure all that out, you know. And Mary comes running up, and Mary's like saying, beehive, beehive, beehive. And I'm thinking, I'm allergic to bees. Like, keep them out, you know what I'm saying? But as she kept getting closer, I heard her correctly. She was saying, he's alive, he's alive, he's alive. And we're going, who's alive, who's alive? And she said, she was at the tomb, and the tomb was empty, and she said that there was an angel there, and the angel said, go tell the disciples and Peter that everything is okay, he's risen. And so, me and John, we hightailed it down there, and if John says he beat me, he's totally lying, all right? I beat him, I'm lying, all right? You know? When we get down there, and I'm looking in that tomb, and it is empty. There's nothing in there, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And John is right there. John is so good with words. He should write a book. He is so good with words. And John said, don't you get it, Peter? This is everything Jesus said he was going to do. And you did it, and it's done. Let's go. This is so great.
Wait, the angel said what?
Go tell the disciples and Peter that everything is okay. He is risen. You've risen. Let's go.
He said what?
Go tell the disciples and Peter. To the disciples and Peter. You said my name. Why did you say my name?
Peter, that's grace.
No, I don't deserve that, because that night people kept coming up to me asking me if I belonged to you, if I was with you, and I kept denying you left and right, all right? No, it'll take me my whole life to make up for what I did. It was unforgivable for what I did.
What I did on the cross was meant to take what is unforgivable and make it forgivable. That's my grace. It's not about you. It's always about me. That's grace, Peter.
Peter could not accept that what he did could ever be forgiven. Even though he tried to gloss over it, put it aside, not deal with it in that clip, he could not deal with the shame that he felt. What was Jesus' response to Peter? He showed his love for him by having the angel specifically let Peter know that he was alive. That was the first step in relationships restored. What Jesus did on the cross made the unforgivable become forgivable. Had nothing to do with Peter's actions or words, nothing Peter could do to take away that sin and shame. It was always all about Jesus, about his grace. In the face of intolerable cruelty, ignorance, hatred and bigotry, in the midst of all that darkness, a voice cried out, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." God's grace was there for Peter to accept. It was his response to that gift of grace. That's what's counted. Peter was no longer trapped by the past, no longer identified as that disciple who betrayed Jesus, not just in God's eyes, but also very importantly, with the other disciples. This is very important. They also had to accept that Peter had been forgiven and restored in Jesus' eyes. They had to accept that as well and not keep holding it over him. How often do we hold it over someone even though there is restoration, but we continue to bring it up and make it a point and go over it again and again down the track? Peter had been restored. And because of that restoration and the calling to ministry, Peter was then able to be able to do what God wanted him to do. Peter was a changed man in God's eyes and theirs. Who stood up at Pentecost proclaiming good news? Wasn't James, wasn't John. It was Peter, the rock, which once was broken and shattered, was now restored. The thing to remember is Jesus will always take us where we are, as long as we're honest. Let me ask you, how is it with your soul this morning? Is it fine? Don't pretend your relationship with Christ is fine when it's not. Because God knows. You can't hide it from him. And it's healthy to admit when things aren't right. And that's the first step that needs to be taken for any sort of restoration to happen. And if there's any place to be able to do that, in our fellowship in our church should be the safest, best place to admit that things aren't always right. Let's face it, the church is not a pretty place of fine people. It's a place of dirty, hurting people in needing of grace and assistance. We come together to help each other grow in faith and grow closer to God. But we need to admit, though, we need that help. Do you agape me? No, I'm not there yet, Lord. But I want to be. I want to be there. It's not that I don't want to be there, but I'm struggling at the moment. And God says, good, let's work on that. I'm very conscious of my shortcomings. I stand before you as a pastor of a small, growing church who is at times very insecure about my ability to be your pastor. At times I've struggled as a father, as a husband and a son. I've been divorced once and nearly a second time. And at times people irritate me and I don't deal with this well. Ask my daughters that. I can become very task-focused and at times struggle to display warmth and joy. My walk with Christ has struggled at times, and there have been periods in my life that my rebellion against God was great, which also affected those around me. Some days I am so close to him, and yet there are other days God doesn't once even into my mind. I never feel like I am enough. I know I'm not enough. Only Jesus is enough. And I thank God with all that I am, that he loves me with an agape love, a love that has no strings attached. And I thank him so much for his grace. It's greater than any sin, any failure that I have done. Romans 5, great passage. All that passing laws against sin did was produce more lawbreakers. But sin didn't and doesn't deserve to have a chance in competition with the aggressive forgiveness we call grace. When it's sin versus grace, grace wins hands down. All sin can do is threaten us with death. And that's the end of it. Grace, because God is putting everything together again through the Messiah, invites us into life. A life that goes on and on and on. A world without an end. I'm so thankful that when I had met Jesus around that fire, and he asked me, while living with no strings attached, that he did not and will never wipe me, because at times I can only answer like Peter. God is asking you now, do you love me? We just need to answer honestly, exactly how we are. So will you do that? Can you do that? And when we do, he will then also call us to look after his sheep, to tend his lambs, and to feed his sheep. Let's close in prayer. Lord, here I am with all my weaknesses, shortcomings and failings. I know that there is nothing I can do to be restored in your sight. Nothing. Your grace is beyond what I deserve. And yet you never hold back. And I thank you. Thank you for forgiving me, for restoring me and calling me. I do love you, Lord. In your name.